All right. So, did you hand out what you want to hand out?
Yes,
there?
thank you.
Good. Okay, so we have the man who was blind from birth, and I do have some of the words described. In most of the words we've been through in the Greek, we can see that the words that are used by John are much more concrete and distinctive than we know. Usually all those words are translated to see or to remember or to know, and it's like they have very specific meanings. The last one we were looking at was 29. We see with physical eyes that the Theos, the God, has uttered words to Moses. Why do I put Theos there? God has uttered words to Moses, but we do not see with physical eyes from what place he is. From what place he is. And the man answered, and they're talking about Jesus. This is the Pharisees answering back to Jesus. They're lying. Like we said before, they're lying, and that's obvious. It's an irony in the Greek. But the Pharisees are lying because they do know the place he is. And you see what word they use in Greek? We don't see with physical eyes the place he is from. Literally, it's a, what do you call it? It's a construction in Greek that allows me to say, oh, I don't know where you're from because I don't see with physical eyes your house that you're in. Yeah, it's an obfuscation. It's a very interesting one too. But in the English, you know, what did they translate in English? I think they just say see. We don't see. We know not. They use no because this construction to see with physical eyes, the oida words, all that those verbs, usually they're translated to know in the English translations, but you already have seen there are like more than one. I haven't counted them up. I think there's like 5 words that we translate to know in Greek, but they're very varied in their actual concrete meaning. And so when we translate them just to know, well, it's like love. You know, I thought it was really ironic almost that in our prayers of the church, right, we say to love. Well, what do you mean? I always want to ask, well, what do you mean? You know, they're in the way of Hollywood, in the way of, you know what I'm saying? There's so many multiple meanings of the word love. It's almost dangerous in English to state it to someone who's aware of those differences in the language, right? And the Greek is the same way. To use this word, well, English is the same way. No. I'm sure that if we looked at the Oxford English Dictionary, there'd be like 10 pages to define no. And yet in Greek, we have all these multiple ways, but there's an irony. And the man answered, so this is a man who was blind from birth. Now that is remarkable. I think the translators caught it finally, right? They caught the irony. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. You got to know there's more to this, right? You say, wait, there's something behind this. The man answered and said to them, why hearing is a marvelous thing, that ye know not whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Okay. Kenny, the Thanksgiving thing, they said, so far everybody says they want to meet and have, but is there any more definition you need to give us?
No, the only problem is we'll probably text or email someone if we get stuck and don't make it home. We're coming back from Rome that Friday.
I'm checking out with Paul. The apostle and my buddy.
So when they're in Athens and they go to Mars Hill, hopefully there won't be any incidents.
We'll get lost, yeah, or something, right? So you notice, here's that word we love. He concluded for himself. That's the guy. So he thought about this. You know, he didn't just off the cuff. The man faced the man, And he said to them, in he sure it, assigning a reason. And remember, I always like to leave this gar as assigning a reason because they truly translate it for. But when you see this word, this literally means that the Greek is moving into, it's like when you see therefore, right? If you read therefore in the English sentence, you know, well, he must be making some kind of logical reason, right? Gar is the same way. When it says gar, especially, and it's always at the beginning of a statement, it indicates that this is a logos. The guy is, the writer, the speaker is providing a logos. Assigning a reason, the marvelous, the thaumaston, the marvelous, describing an awe-invoking sight, a dramatic sense of wonder, moving the beholder to deepest emotions. I like this really cool word in Greek, right? It is that or because you stare at, you do not stare at from which or what place he is, and he opened the eyes, my eyes. The man could glare himself, and he said to them, assigning a reason, and this, the marvelous it is, that you do not stare at from what place he is. And he opened up my eyes. Do you see the irony in this? What is he saying? He's saying that since Jesus opened his eyes, what does he do? Yeah, he stares at where he's from. He knows where he's from, but you don't. What is the conclusion? What is that they are what? They're blind. Yeah, and by the way, this isn't that. It's really interesting because Jesus makes the same comment before, right, in John, that are you blind? And he's going to use it again because all this is preparatory. All this is preparatory to Jesus' statements about the exact same subject, which we're going to get into, which is really cool. So here's their response, or here's the response. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. We see with physical eyes that are because the God of the misses the mark, know or not hears, other thing, contrariwise, in case a certain one or thing from the God, this is an interesting word, theosebis. I think I've got it, reverence toward the gods, true piety. This is just an interesting word. Devout worshipers, it's used only in this verse, period, in the thing. But it is a Greek, it is a very important Greek word. I think, do I have it defined here? No, I don't. I think I just got it defined in the text. But this word, theosebis, theo, God, sebis, revere, reverence toward the gods. And you would think that this word would have more play, right? This, again, I think points to the fact that this gospel was written for the Greeks and Romans. Because you can see why the Hebrews would not generally use that word, right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't. Paul doesn't. But you say, revering the gods, revering God, right? They don't use that word. It's very interesting. And also, well, they use theos all the time, but it's interesting that they don't use this word that includes theos in it. Well, whatever. The determination to act the will of him, he makes or does, of him he hears. So here's the translation. We see with physical eyes that the God hears not of those who miss the mark, which is a true statement from the Old Testament. Contrariwise, in case that someone reverence toward the God and the determination of him, he does of him he hears. And it's a little bit complicated the way it says. We see with physical eyes that the God hears not of those who miss the mark. In other words, God doesn't listen to those who are miss the mark, right? Which, by the way, is in its own irony, right? Because all have sinned, right? Paul reminds us of that. All have sinned. So therefore, God doesn't hear anyone, which is what makes Jesus necessary, right? Contrariwise, in case someone reverence toward the God and the determination and active will of him, he does of him he hears. In other words, the one who listens or hears God, right? Let's see what our translator tried to make it simple for us, but I think it's too simple. But if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. In other words, he hears God, right? This is what it's saying. Or God hears him. Yeah. Do you see this? It's kind of, I tell you, Greek is very concrete, but yet you can see how the author is leading us in both directions, because the implication is that Jesus is therefore God because he hears, and yet God hears him. So it's kind of we say, well, this is convoluted Greek. Well, it's not really convoluted Greek. It's just the Greek is being intentionally a little obscure, and I think it's purposely obscure because it's implying both. God is hearing God, and God is hearing him, right? So it's an implication. And like I said, this is an unstated telos in the words of the Pharisees. They just concluded that Jesus is doing God's will.
Because he couldn't do it without God hearing him.
Exactly.
Because he couldn't do it if he had sinned.
And yet the implication too is that God hears him and he hears God, which is what Jesus has been telling us for the last, 8, 9 chapters, right? That's what Jesus has been telling us, that I hear God, God hears me. And that, of course, implying that he is God, not just implying, stating outright that he is God. So again, this is really an interesting thing, very concrete. I mean, you could even go deeper in this. There is a Tanakh allusion, which is Psalm 82:6, the Psalm of Asaph. And of course, we know that those are added in the Septuagint. God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. The use of that word in Greek, because it comes directly from the Septuagint. Isn't that interesting? He renders judgment among the gods. How long will you defend the unjust, show partiality to the wicked, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked? The gods know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. But you will die like mere mortals. You will fall like every other ruler. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance. Yes?
Would this Septuagint word for gods be the same as the translated word for Elohim? Would that be the same origin there or whatever?
Well, let's see. This would be Elohim. This is Elohim with a singular verb. This is Elohim. That's why they put it in quotes, because Elohim means gods, right? Defend unjust. I don't see any of the Yahweh, Adonai, or other than that. Oh God, this would be a singular verb with plural Elohim. So I don't know if that helps. But it's very interesting. Let's see, where would that anyway, this is interesting. You are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. Which which we'll get more from Jesus anyway. No one has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind.
Is it still the Pharisees saying that?
It's hard to tell whether the Pharisees or the guy. We presume that the guy is saying this because it's in the it's in the dialogue form. So in Greek dialogue, they don't usually identify the speaker. You find this is a problem when you look at the Socratic dialogues or the other dialogues, you know, Zeno's dialogues, et cetera, you know. But the implication is that the guy spoke, the Pharisees spoke. That was the Pharisees. The previous one was the Pharisees, and now the guy speaks again. This is hid word. Since the world began, it is not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind. From out or among of the age, which is interesting, of the age, no or not, it is heard that it because opened a certain one thing, the eyes, to raise a smoke, hence blind, of he having begotten. Out from among the ages has not been heard that anyone opened the eyes of he having been begotten, darkened by smoke, blind. And then the next statement, is part of this. As I told you in the Greek, the guys who versified the Greek tried to fit it as they could, but you can see this is a direct. This should have been connected with the previous verse statement. I don't like word verse, but statement. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing.
So the healed blind man is saying.
It's saying this, yeah, that's the implication. It isn't clear. It isn't clear. The clarity is that it uses he. It uses a singular masculine. So that's any clarity we get, but it's using aorist verb forms, which I'm not going to go into huge detail about that, but that's one of the primary Greek verb forms that is used. It's a very interesting Greek verb form that when we try to interpret the Greek, the usage of the verbs, it's usually a subjunctive type verb form, but whatever. It's not. It's like I said, the clarity from the Greek comes from the positioning of the dialogue, the context of the dialogue. So this is the man speaking as far as we know. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. That's not what the Pharisees would say, right? If Menelaus were from Theo, hook not, he would be powerful or possible to make or do nothing. If he were not from a God, he would not be powerful to do nothing. Of course, double negative in English, it's positive, but in Greek, they use it. In most languages, by the way, use double negative, multiple negative. It's only English and, as far as I know, the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon. I'm not sure what the Normandic, the other languages do. Anybody know what Norwegian or Dutch is German? German doesn't use double negatives.
Scandinavian languages are related a little bit to German too. So I don't know what they do in that particular case, but it seems strange to me that Greek would be that way because Greek is logical and mathematical. And you know, if you have like two negatives in number, you know, negative what it doesn't. That's not mathematical.
Yeah, but you know, they really hadn't invented Boolean, right? And I thought it was, what was I watching? I thought it was really interesting. I was watching something where they were talking about what was I watching that about? Oh, I was watching a show that talked about, you know, how in the empirical age, as we move from the age to the empirical age, right, that, and what do we call it? The Age of Enlightenment. When we moved into the Age of Enlightenment, one of the big deals was that you could describe everything mathematically. And to a degree, you can. However, mathematics is not real. Mathematics is totally based in logic, right? And so the Greeks, because they didn't have equations, they didn't have algebra, they didn't have equations, they had a base 5 system, which is really hard to do math in anyway, right? So they didn't have all these really cool things that we have even when we're in first grade. So part of the problem, or not maybe a problem, but we've seen, right, the ukme, no not, which means a very strong negation in Greek. And of course, we don't like that. They would actually could say uk me ode, odin, right? No, not nothing. And we'd say, well, what does that mean?
Zero zilch.
Yeah.
Well, and in English, we do like our triple multiple negative forms, except we turn them from our language, right? It's not grammatically correct in English, but we have our own, what do you call it, idiomatic statements in English, which we create and produce. I'm not familiar enough with a lot of the other languages in how they do that, because that's really kind of a detailed thing, right? But of course, all of our teachers' hackles get up when we see the double negative. This doesn't have a triple negative, but it's kind of still pretty fun. If he were not from a God, he would not be powerful to do nothing, to do anything we want to say. But I like to leave it that way so we see the strength of the statement, negative statement. To this they replied. To this they replied. Pharisees, right? That's the they. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Of course, there's a little bit more to this, which is really cute.
It's always a good way to end an argument.
Oh, you're a sinner, get out of here.
Well, he already really irritated them anyway, right? Like I told you, this guy is probably I'm gonna put him as the second smartest guy in the Gospels. We have the Samaritan woman, who I think takes the prize. She's the one who understood it all, right? This guy is arguing toe to toe with the Pharisees.
And wiping the floor with them.
Yeah. He's doing Jesus good work, right? Because Jesus is going to get him. But do you notice the difference? This is very Greek. All the arguments that Jesus have there, the end of a lot of the arguments that Jesus has, right? Some of them, and we're going to see more. At the end, what do? Try to stone him, try to do stuff. But, they get irritated. He irritates them, but yet the confrontation is leveled out. That's very Greek. In these confrontations, all the other confrontations that we're going to see, what happens? They don't level out. The bad guys, basically they get frustrated and say, you're done. You're a sinner. Get out of here, right? Let's see what it says in Greek, because Greek is always fun. They concluded for themselves. So, do you see this? Our picture is blah, 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 blah. But the reality is, he says something, they think about it, they reply, he thinks about it, so it's a very kind of Greek thing. We don't do this in English, right? Meg, we get complaints. If you've never talked to people, Germanic people from Europe, now the French would probably say we're very like French, but in English, what do? When someone's speaking, we're thinking about a reply. Right? And so we're immediately engaging because that's our culture. In Germanic culture, they don't do that. Right? You ever been in a conversation with German people? In Germanic culture, this person speaks. There may be a pause, maybe not. Maybe everybody takes a drink. Then it's the next person's turn. And everybody's quiet while they're speaking. This was brought home to me because my brother-in-law was saying about his son-in-law who's German, and that's one of his big complaints. When people are talking in America, when we have our opinion and ideas, we want to get it out. We break into the conversation.
We call it interjecting.
Yeah. We don't listen very well.
Walking over.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
We don't,
Fighting over. My dad used to say that there are two kinds of people, those who listen and those who wait to talk.
That's what you say, yeah.
We don't listen, we wait for our opportunity to talk.
Yep.
And yet, because of it, we put men on the moon. You know, there's a reason why the Chinese are trying to gain this English American interaction status. There's a reason why the Japanese would really like to get it. They can't. It's really interesting to me that Europe ignores it because they say we're culturally insensitive and ugly, right? Yes, ma'am.
That reminds me of one thing I heard about, TikTok, that the Chinese are not just taking our data, but they're learning how we think. Like, they're taking, their algorithms are because they have a different culture, like you said. They're learning the American individualistic way of thinking and doing and everything just from what people swipe and everything that people do. They are now understanding us so that they can better strategize against us.
That is, I think, a very good observation and precisely correct. And one of the problems that you're going to have, though, and I've written about this before, that, number one, can you create this kind of device in a non-capitalistic, non-market-centric culture? It's impossible. The Soviet Union could barely make airplanes that you could communicate with because they were still using tube technology when we defeated them in the Cold War. Can you imagine? Now, they did a great job with their tube technology, and they built iron airplanes, which had real issues because they were iron airplanes, kind of is, right? But still, the technology, the ability to make an engine. Oh, and by the way, I just have to say this is wonderful because remember the the MiG-25, Foxbat. They said that when the airplane could go Mach 2 point something, it couldn't go Mach 3. They really wanted to go Mach 3 like the SR-71. They get it to Mach 2 point something, 2.3, I think. But they said every time it went above Mach 2, they said 1,000 families starved in the Soviet Union because every time they took it to Mach 2, the engines would have to be rebuilt. It would ruin the engines. And so when the guy landed the airplane, it cost so much to rebuild those engines that the joke in the Soviet Union, and it was a huge joke in perestroika, that it took 10,000 families starved because it took so much money to build those things that people couldn't eat. Very interesting culture and society, right? Non-market based. Anyway, that's socialism. You're headed that way, so it's okay, right? They answered and said to him, "Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us?" And they cast him out. They concluded for themselves, and they said to him, "To miss the mark, you were beget." Okay. Well, I'll ask this when we get there. This is really good. Think about this. In miss the mark, you were beget. All the whole, and you teach to us, and they threw. Exabalon, they threw him out to him outside of doors. Exo. Exabalon auton exo. This is really cool because this was reused. I may have quoted, but this is used more than once. This phrase is used more than once in John to throw them out of doors. They concluded for themselves, they said to him, "Wholly in to miss the marks, you were begat." I should cut that out. "And you teach us," and they threw him outside of doors. They threw him outside of doors. Now, okay, what was the first question at the very beginning of this chapter? What did the disciples ask?
Who sinned?
Who sinned? Did the parents sin or did he sin? Now we know, logically, is it possible for him to sin? So therefore, it would either have to be original sin or it would have to be because of what he was going to do in his life. right? Okay. And Jesus said it's not his sin and it's not his parents' sin. What's the conclusion of the Pharisees?
He was born in sin.
He was born in sin. Now, theologically, you got a lot to think about. I'm not going to even go there, but I'm just saying this is a very interesting statement because the Pharisees are in direct opposition to Jesus. And that's part of the point here. That's also part of the irony. And it's also something we miss because it happened what? 33 statements before when Jesus says, the disciples ask him, who sinned? And that is the, okay, we don't look at the New Testament this way. We really should, because it's not giving us the intro, body, and conclusion. What did it start with? It started with not a theological statement, with a theory. It started with a theory. What's the theory? Because this man was born blind, the theory was it because of his parents or him? And so the whole argument was to do what? Jesus said it wasn't his parents or him. It's to show the glory of God, the doxa of God, very Roman, very Greek. And then it's the whole of the rest is to prove what? It wasn't him. It wasn't his parents. It's not their sin. It's all to show the glory of God. And so there's more to the story, right? There's more to this whole incident because we had the Semeion. We've had this beautiful Greek dialogue between the Pharisees and his parents, but first between him and the Pharisees, then the parents and the Pharisees. The parents said, he's of age, talk to him. Right? And then they get him in there. And like I told you, this guy is like brilliant from a Greek standpoint. He's slaughtering them. Yeah, just.
Well, I'm just thinking too, they are the high and mighty rabbis that teach everybody. And so they think they know their stuff. So who are you to dare to talk to us this way is where they're coming from right here. It's like we're done with you. Even though he's beating them logically right and left, I mean, they can't beat his arguments. So they give up and they toss him out, basically.
Yeah. Oh, yes. What are you going to say?
I think that their only argument then is, well, you're a sinner. And we go back to the beginning. And so what they've done is they've assigned original sin to him, which is equal to everyone. So they've implicated themselves as sinners as well.
I think
all they can do is throw him out.
I think that's one way to look at it and a great way to look at it. But who should they throw out? Themselves. Yes. But do you see this? There is a cultural connection here that I think is really amazing because you have the Hebrew culture and you have the Greek culture. The Greek and the Roman culture would say, what's the problem with this guy? He is cursed by the gods, right? He's cursed by the gods. Jesus has already told you there ain't no cursing by the gods, right? Because he's saying, what is it for? The glory of the God. He's not cursed by the gods. This is to show, this turns the Greek and Roman worldview totally upside down. Now, the Hebrew worldview is what? It's not original sin. It's he was born in sin. Therefore, if it wasn't his parents' sin or his sin, therefore he wouldn't be blind, right? That's what the disciples said. Who sinned? The parents or him? You know, they think they're being wise. They're asking a very logical, a very Hebraic question.
One of the problems is, like in Job. Job wasn't born, the people blame Job, you must have done something. But this guy is a total exception to the rule because he was born this way.
He's
He
innocent,
didn't
right?
do an action that caused his blindness.
Yeah.
And so it's putting them on the spot, like how to explain sin.
We have 2,000 years, hopefully, of reason and logic, right? That we feel we understand this situation intrinsically. But I want you to see how they're thinking. And they're thinking, the Hebrews are thinking, this man is cursed by God because he sinned. And actually, they wouldn't say he's cursed by God. They say he's just cursed because of the sin, right?
There's a lesson here for people today. We still think when bad things happen, we've done something to deserve it. And no, that's not the case. It's bad things happen because they happen.
The whole world is under a curse.
Yeah. I think that's this whole change. I hope, as Christians, in modern Christians, our theological and philosophical background, which I think we ought to really teach it as philosophy and theology, right? We have a different worldview about the whole of the cosmos, right? We realize and recognize that the gay is cursed. The philosophia isn't cursed. The cosmos itself isn't cursed, but the gay is cursed. And the ruler of the gay is Satan. We even sing about it. The prince and power of the world is not Christ. It's the devil, it's Satan, right? He controls the gay. That, I think, is indelible in our minds. And therefore, when bad things happen, you can't blame God. You can't blame anything except the fact that the curse, if you want to blame Adam, it's Adam's fault, right? Eve didn't do it. Adam did it. Yes, sir.
So we live in a fallen world, and so we are intrinsically subject to the cosmic consequences of our own sin, but also we're subject to the consequences of other people's sin as well.
Yeah, it's like the classroom where one student's mess it up and the teacher says, I'm going to hold you all in recess, right? But it's true. And there really are, I think this is where they miss the mark. They miss the mark big time because there are truly consequences of not aiming for the mark. There really are. You may have been, I don't know anybody's circumstance, but you may have been the best surgeon in the whole world if you had gone down, if at one point in your life, and I think God gives us multiple opportunities. I don't think it's just one, right? It's like James Finney. James Finney writes in his stuff all the time. James Finney, if you didn't know, was one of the greatest revival preachers in American history. It made one of the huge revivals. But James Finney says over and over again in his things, God gave me multiple opportunities, and I kept turning them down until finally I go, okay, right? And when he did that, it's kind of like Paul, right? Finally, on the road to Emmaus, God kept giving him opportunities until the road to Emmaus road to Damascus, and then he goes, whack, right? Hit him over the head with a 2x4. Jonathan, what's his name? The great American philosopher who did Harvard, I think, started Harvard. Jonathan Edwards, I think it's Edwards, is a guy, he was wandering, he always wandered in the woods. He loved to walk in the woods, in Boston, I think. And he's walking in the woods, and he would always philosophize. He was a huge philosopher, and he was trying to prove the existence of God. He did it through multiple ways, mostly by the infinite rotational theories and infinite theories. But anyway, he was walking through the woods one day in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in Boston, and all of a sudden he had a vision of God. And God told him, hey, I want you to be a preacher. I want you to do this. I want you to start a university. I think he even told him to make a university. And so he writes in his things, he had multiple opportunities, but at one point, God actually spoke to him. So I'm saying that in our life, the tragic consequences of not aiming for the mark, right? And then there are other tragic consequences where you may have aimed for the mark all your life, right? And yet, cancer, disease, unfortunate accidents that are caused by others, and then there are problems you cause yourself. I tell you, if you're a drug user, abuser, and you cause yourself some serious problems like an overdose or whatever, that is not good. And that's the consequences of sin, right? So, I don't know. And then we know there are, anyway, society is judgmental in itself. There are many things that aren't sin. Some people think that dancing is a sin. Some people think that smiling and laughing is a sin. And I guarantee you that some of the things we do that are innocuous in our own cultural viewpoints may be unhappy to God. But, what do you do, right?
Is John Harvard.
There was another guy.
With Harvard University.
Who's Jonathan Edwards? Jonathan Edwards.
He was the great American preacher.
Yeah.
Bergman. I'm not sure.
He's a philosopher. I think he started one of those universities.
I thought you said Kant was the one who was thinking of like the infinite rotational, I don't know, whatever it was.
I think it's Edwards that was doing the infinite rotation. I got it in my philosophy papers back when I was
I certainly wouldn't know. So.
years and years ago. Because I studied all the philosophy. I probably got a couple of books and probably got marks in them already. Oh, anyway, they concluded for themselves. They said, "I'm wholly in to miss the marks. You are beget. You were born into it, and you teach us." And they threw him outside of doors.
Edwards was with Princeton University.
Princeton, okay. I knew it was some university. He was, but I know it's Jonathan Edwards, and he was the guy. His philosophy stuff is really cool. He didn't quite reach the status of Immanuel Kant, who succeeded, but because a lot of guys were using the infinite rotation,
His sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Yeah.
That's very famous.
Well, yeah. They presume because this man was blind that he was conceived in sin. They do not accept this at all. The unstated tells us here is that the man can't any longer be considered in sin at all because he has been made to see. You see that? So unstated tell us if you were a sinner, therefore you're blind. Now your blindness is gone, therefore you are not a sinner anymore. Jesus did this. Woo-hoo-hoo! This is really cool irony, isn't it? The leaders presume that his argument is better than theirs. They say he teaches them. That's what he says. That's their statement. You teach us, right? It doesn't say
So you dare to teach us?
Presume, yeah.
And dost thou teach us? You see what they did in the King James? They did it almost exactly. They put a question mark. How dare you lecture us? See that? But look what it says in the Greek. The Greek says, and you teach us. And you teach us. There's no judgment about whether the teaching is right or not. It's a statement. There's no question word here. There's no question mark. Yes, ma'am.
You know who this reminds me of? The expert class that rules us now. Because they don't have any answers to this man, so they play the expert card. Like, we're the experts, out you go. Like, you have no right to say anything, or you can't teach us anything. And like, just think of like the COVID experts who got everything wrong and made everything worse, or the economic experts who just make everything worse, or politicians who think they're so much greater and just create all our problems. And like all of this expert class, that they're just like them. And we're also letting it happen.
What's really funny is, I think that the Pharisees don't think that they were actively lying. They were going culturally.
Well, they all believe that
Yeah.
Yeah, they all believe that.
What's really funny is Janet Yellen, for example, who is obviously lying. She says that inflation is caused by big business when every economist, every banker, every financial person in the world knows the only way you can get inflation is by deficit spending of a fiat currency. Period. Dot. She thinks we're stupid, but
Unfortunately, that's all too true in too many cases. Otherwise,
needs
we
to
wouldn't
reread
have
Adam
this so-called expert class ruling over us.
yeah, ruling over us, right? They think they rule, but we know better. And that's why they're, well, in Oregon, you don't even have to be able to read, write, and figure to get a degree or get a high school diploma now.
Like, what is the point? What does it even?
12 years of babysitting, come on. And sexual grooming. But, that's just Oregon. They don't do it anywhere else, right? Okay. What's that?
Participation prize.
Participation. Here's your diploma. It's your
Well, then,
participation
again,
prize.
there's a whole cabal of education experts that say, we're the experts, let us do it. Parents don't know anything. You have a master's degree and all that stuff. And all they're doing is making everybody stupider and more indoctrinated. Or like all the race relations experts. They're just making everything way worse than it ever was when I grew up. Like,
You mean the ones that burn down
or the-
things?
yeah, like the health and mental wellness experts are, pushing all the LGBT and just making everything it's just all of us all over again. But of course, Ecclesiastes said there's nothing new under the sun. We just don't remember, and we do it all over again.
Well, I'll mention this really quick in passing, but there used to be a huge fight. I don't know if they're doing more. There are 3 types of psychology you can do, and they broke them into 3 groups. There's the Freudian psychology presumes that it was impacts in your life and psyche that made you what you are. So it's basically your parents, your environment, your whatever they are. You are why you are because of that. Its effectivity rate in solving people's psychological problems is about 5%. There is the Christian method that they call, what do they call that method? What's Immanuel, not Immanuel Kant, the Dutch guy, the Danish guy, Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard. What is his philosophy? Main philosophy?
You're responsible for yourself.
It's basically
Individual.
but there's a name for it anyway. There's the name in psychology is his philosophy, but it's basically you are the cause of your problems. The effectivity rate of solving those is 95% effective rate. 95. There's a mixed method that mixes the Freudian and the other method, and it's about 50-50. Which one do you think they should use? It's your fault, right? Which one do they use?
And it's everyone else's fault. You're not at fault.
It's Freudian. So guess what? With a 5% effectivity rate and solving people's issues, why would they do that? Well, by the way, if I solve your problems, do you need to pay my bills anymore?
That's right. Or vote for me, or put me in any positions of power or anything like that.
Just saying. Anyway, okay, this is really cool stuff. Anyway, then the comedy kicker. They threw him out of doors. We're going to see this more than once in John. They, as you said, they can't handle the argument. I think the audience is Roman and Greek, so Jesus is giving them a counterintuitive, a countercultural argument, and the argument he's giving them is beautiful in Greek, in a Greek sense. It's a logos to telos, and they can't handle it. And, basically, I think it is a reflection into the Hebraic culture, and it's a reflection into the Greek and the Roman culture, and Jesus is turning them both on their heads, and he's saying, this is God. This is the God thing. It's totally rational. It's totally understandable, but the reaction is, we're kicking you out of doors, right? And I think this is a comedy statement. There's a parallel to the opposite in 6:35, where Jesus says, he will not exibalo exo. And did I quote? Yes. Okay. 6:35. I should have quoted 6:35. Anyway, at 6:35, there's a parallel. Jesus says, he will not exibalo exo. So you're supposed to remember back 3 chapters, right, to Jesus' statement, because this is such an interesting statement in Greek. You know, it's like an odd statement. It's like an odd word usage, right? And the minute I use this odd word usage, the hearers are supposed to remember, and of course we can't because we're just not as astute as that culture is in listening. They're listening to everything. They're hearing each other.
Translators may have used a different word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The word exabalo, that's a relative word to parabalo, which is to near throw. This is to throw away out, basically.
Throw out, yeah, out throw. And I'm glad you noticed that. I meant to mention that because this is one of those balo words, you know, hyperbalo, parabolo. There is another word we're going to see later on in chapter 10 that is really an interesting word that you would probably translate as parable, but it's not. It's a totally different word usage in Greek, and it's not a balo form. But, you know, diabolo, these are really interesting words, right? And we have exabalo, which means to throw out, throw away, throw out. But anyway, that is the unstated telos of the following. Because now they say spiritual blindness. That's cool. That's cool. Do you see how this is a setup? Now we have a setup. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe the Son of Man?" Simple statement. Let's see what the Greek
I
really
wish we knew
says.
where he found him. Like, was he hanging out at his house?
Well, he's probably on the street corner. Maybe he's looking for work. I don't know. You know, I'm going to presume that most of this happened not in the temple, but in the temple area. It doesn't tell us, which is really interesting. You know, but okay. Where has everything happened? Pretty much in all of John in Jerusalem.
Near the temple or in the temple or around the temple?
Yeah, around the temple. So I think that he is probably outside the inner court, not the inner court, the court of women, the court of Gentiles, maybe in that area, or maybe just outside. You know, it's hard to tell. It says they exaboloed him, so you know he's not going back. Where's he not going back in? What did they throw him out? The synagogue. The implication is a synagogue, but yet, you know, we haven't been in a synagogue, right? The only place we've been is in the temple or the temple courts, temple area. So it's hard to tell. But yeah, that's our English, right? That's our Englishization. We want to know, where is it? What is happening in the sky? Is it a sunny day? Is it raining? Is it sleeting? Is the snow falling? Is there a cat sitting over here? Did Jesus kneel and pet the cat? Right? That's what we want to know, but we don't get that because it's not Greek. Anyway, Jesus heard they cast him out, and when he found him, he said to him, "Dost thou believe on the Son of God?" Ooh, interesting.
Mine says son of man.
That's what the NIV says, Son of Man.
Oh, it says, my note says, some manuscripts, the Son of God.
Yeah. And the King James translates Son of God. Interesting, right? He heard Jesus, that because they threw him out, exibalon, to him outside of doors. Exibalon exo. It's funny. You know, we ought to be using that with our kids. Exibalon exo, get outside. And having found, especially after searching him, so Jesus was looking for him. You know, we don't get that from the
When he found him.
English, right? We think, Jesus is going along with his son. Oh, hey, there he is. No. Jesus is actually looking for this guy because he heard, right, they've been thrown out. It says, found him. He said, "You pisteos, you are persuaded," convinced of a logical argument, "into the offspring of man." That's, of course, the code word from the Hebrew. Jesus heard that they had threw him outside of doors, and having found, especially searching, he said, "You are persuaded into the offspring of the man-faced human or man." And I put a question mark, but there is no question thing. This is, I put a question mark because this is one of those things in Greek. right? Greek is very concrete. The words used say specifically, now what is Jesus saying to him? He's persuaded. He is persuaded, right? But yet there's an implication here that it's a question. You see that? Jesus is saying, I think Jesus is saying that you are persuaded. That's what it says in the Greek. You are persuaded into the offspring of the man face, into the offspring of man, right? He's saying that specifically, but there is a implied question here. Yes, sir.
It seems to say son of man more than son of God in the Greek.
It does, yeah. And this is majority text. I pull it from the majority text. So as Ann said, some manuscripts say son of Theos, right? But do you see this? Why do you think the Greek writers might have put that in later? Might have put the manuscript in because what?
They understood that.
They got it. Yeah, exactly. You're right on the money. They got it. They understood the whole point was Jesus is saying, I'm God. And so he's asking, son of God, son of man, which is, by the way, interchangeable in some respect, right? It's a code word.
So the translators were trying to help the reader out
Yes.
by expounding on the
Give them a little
code.
bit of the tell-us there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in the Old Testament, they use son of man quite a bit.
Yes.
God said son
At
of
least
man,
in Daniel.
but it really wasn't referring to Jesus.
Well, wasn't the
It's
vision-
code.
The vision in Daniel, the son of man, is Jesus, yeah, and he's this divine figure.
Which we really get from the apocryphal works. That's why I try to bring in the apocryphal works, because you're going to find the idea of the Messiah. Yes, we look back in the Old Testament from our point of view, right? Seeing the whole New Testament laid out, and we go, well, yeah, this is obviously prophecy, right? But where you really get this stuff is not there. It's in the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha really gives in depth this idea of the Messiah and the whole idea. And a lot of it's, the philosophy of the rabbis and the ideas of the rabbis, which we miss because we don't have the Mishnah. I try to bring in those sources so we can see that information. But it's just that way, right? And look what he says. Jesus says, you are persuaded. Who is he, sir? Tell me so I may believe in him. Okay.
Sounds like the woman at the well.
This is a setup. Do you see the setup? This is a beautiful Greek setup. The answer said, who is he, Lord? That I might believe in him. Jesus just said, you believe, right? And he's like, well, who is this guy? He concluded himself, that one there. And he said, who, what, or what? There's the question words right there, right? He is supreme in authority in order that I may be persuaded into him. That one there concluded for himself, and he said, and who is he, supreme in authority, Lord, in order that I may be persuaded of a logical argument in him? And Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. This is a stated telos without a what? Where was the logos? The logos was the 35 verses before this, right? That is the logos setup, and we get a telos. Now the Greeks are going like, yeah. This is so cool, right? Because somebody is actually giving them a telos, and the disciples should be happy,
Yeah.
right?
They always wanted to stay.
They wanted a stated telos. The problem is, what's the problem with them? And we're going to see this more. What's the problem? It's a stated telos, but it's disconnected from the logos, right? It doesn't say assigning a reason, la, 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 therefore, right? It gives us this beautiful logos, this semeion, followed by this beautiful discussion and argument with the Pharisees. And then at the very end, Jesus says, you believe in the Son of Man, You're persuaded of the Son of Man. And he goes, who's that? It's me.
Jesus says, you get it. And he says, what do I get?
Yeah.
It's me. That's kind of like a silly question. Dummy, I'm standing here. That's what you get. You know who I am.
Recognize, wouldn't the man recognize Jesus' voice as the one who took care of his blindness?
Well, he would have seen him. He saw him.
It said you saw me, I think.
Yeah. This we'll see more of this, but this is a setup by John, and also Jesus is giving expounding, right? But I think that what did you say? Did Pat say, or maybe Ann said, this is like the Samaritan woman?
Yeah.
This is just like the Samaritan woman. The Samaritan woman was a different kind of setup.
Yeah, like he might have not known that this was the Messiah. He might have thought this is a prophet like Elijah or something who could do miracles.
Yeah.
You know, he knew obviously he was special, but he didn't maybe understand he was the Son of Man.
And you notice this expression is to the, I'm sorry, we keep you a little, this is expression to the Hebrews as opposed to the Samaritans and the Greeks and Romans, right? We've already set up for the Greeks and Romans. They know from the Samaritan woman. Now we're given the whole thing. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at this week. In your name we pray, amen.
So we're gonna have class after Thanksgiving. So we have one more class and then we're gone for 2.
Interesting up there.